Imagine you're 20 levels and a solid 3 years deep into a campaign. You've been gradually increasing your barbarian's power with each level, building them out just the way that you want to, and working hard to make sure that you can shrug off some of the most potent effects that might devastate you. But then, as you trudge along through the night, you come upon a ferocious wolf protecting their pack. Not concerned, you just walk around it. You have no interest in fighting with a wolf. But as you keep moving, you suddenly hear the sound of feet barreling towards you. You turn and see the wolf charging at you, jaw wide open and ready to bite. It sinks its teeth into you, and you immediately fall to the ground, writhing in pain. How is this possible, you hear yourself think? I have a strength of +7, if I had to put a number on it, and this little CR 1/4, whatever that means, wolf just knocked me to the ground. Even air elementals at least let me try to do something about it. These are the final things that run through your mind as you stand up and absolutely obliterate the wolf in front of you. Some pretty major parts of monster design have changed significantly with the 2024 Monster Manual. On average, things are hitting harder now. Monsters are a bit tankier, they've got more powerful abilities, refined spellcasting, or just powerful non-spell magical attacks. But probably the thing that has caught the attention of many in the online community are the apparent sweeping uses of on-hit, no-save rider effects that some monsters have received. Now, I know that is a mouthful and might not even sound like English if you aren't as deeply entrenched in the game terminology, so to make sure that we are all on the same page, let's look at an example. Before I do though, I'll give a shout out to all of my channel members, and especially to Kobe, my newest one. All of your continued support means so much to me, so thank you so much. Also, in case you missed it, I just released my own merch. This has been something I've been working on for a while and connecting with artists to make some really cool and fun designs. So if you'd like to help support the channel and get something sweet at the same time, check out the link to my store in the description and the pinned comment, or the merch shelf below the video. We've got a wide variety of sizes and colors available for everything, so thank you once again. The new Mind Flayer. It can make an attack with its tentacles. If the attack hits and the target is a medium or smaller, which essentially every player character is, except in some very niche scenarios, they become automatically grappled. No additional saves are required. They're just grappled. But on top of that, they're also stunned. And again, no additional save for that either. And this also dealt an average of 22 psychic damage, so it's not even like it's sacrificing on damage for the sake of the potent status conditions. This is an on-hit, no-save rider effect. All the creature had to do was hit you, and then in addition to taking some damage, you're also under the effect of one or sometimes two different conditions without being given the opportunity to do anything about it. Now, this is a notable distinction from how the same ability worked in 2014. Previously, the tentacle attack would still automatically grapple the target, but the stun condition was not automatically applied. The target would also have the opportunity to make a DC 15 intelligence saving throw or become stunned. I mean, sure, in practice, most people were going to fail that save anyway, but that isn't really the point here. At least you had the opportunity to avoid it, but now you don't. And that's a big deal, and I have some thoughts, so let's get back to my roots and talk about the design implications of on-hit, no-save effects in Dungeons & Dragons. So obviously the tale of the barbarian getting knocked prone at the beginning was a bit tongue-in-cheek, but it is emblematic of probably the most simplified version of this design concern, that even some of the weakest creatures in the game can somehow completely overpower one of the strongest characters in the game for no other reason than because. And yeah, as unlikely as it is that a 20th level barbarian is going to come face to face with a hostile wolf, it doesn't really change the very bizarre and unintuitive interaction that occurs here. By this point in your adventuring career, by 20th level, you are considered masters of the world and have superheroic capabilities that are things of legend, and yet a lowly wolf can knock you down. It just feels a bit silly. Anyway, that being said, I feel that there are 5 core design implications at play here that need to be considered when discussing how likely this is to actually impact the game. I want to be abundantly clear though that at this point, I'm not taking a stance on whether I think on-hit no-save effects are good or bad. I think there are likely some pros and cons in either direction. The purpose of this video, as always, isn't to tell you that I'm right and you're wrong, but rather to present the design considerations and just have a discussion about it. That said, I will share some of my own thoughts at the end. So we're going to start off with what I think are the likely reasons they made the decision to do this, and then to follow it up with the knock-on effects. So the first consideration is faster play. Throughout the Unearthed Arcana process and during the reveals, Jeremy Crawford spoke at length about how one of the most fundamental and basic things that the team were constantly evaluating was the pace and speed of play. Whether or not you think this was impacted is really up to you. If you've got players with access to weapon masteries that are constantly trying to topple, then no, it likely won't feel like it's much faster given the additional saves that have been introduced now in each round. But at the same time, other players might find certain interactions have become more streamlined, which can help keep the game moving. While this might seem insignificant, the pace of turns and rounds is a very important element of the game that the designers need to keep in the back of their mind. As tempting as it might be to throw in all kinds of new and crazy effects, with every new one comes the potential to bog the game down and slow play to a crawl, which can lead to players disengaging. But at the same time, if things are too light, then players might not feel like there's enough to keep them invested either. It's a constant tug of war and is entirely relative to the type of game that you are creating. Some will lean heavier and others lighter, while some will try and stick somewhere in the middle. With that said, the old wolf required a saving throw to determine if it would knock a character prone. The new wolf does not. Now, on the face of it, this clearly seems like something that will increase the speed of play, one less saving throw to make per attack. But what's interesting to me about this is that it's a strange instance where the speeding up of a given turn can potentially lead to the slowing down of a round. In 2014, if the very brawny barbarian makes their save, which they probably would, they don't have any new considerations to make. They can just continue to attack or do whatever it was that they were going to do. But now, in 2024, they're just automatically knocked prone. That player then needs to think about some different things here. What is the makeup of the encounter? Because attacks made within 5 feet are now at advantage from anything, but attacks made from more than 5 feet are at disadvantage. So is it worth it to stay prone and risk some incoming attacks? How many attacks are going to be made? Are my allies up next? When is the next enemy's turn? And yeah, you'll likely run through all of these thoughts in just a few seconds, but that doesn't make it any less worthwhile to mention and can even influence on how other party members might be taking their turns. Did you end up getting knocked unconscious? Should someone be trying to heal you or use a pushing spell or a weapon to try to get the monsters away? And yeah, prone is a relatively low stakes condition, but there's plenty of others that involve being stunned or incapacitated or paralyzed, so just keep that in mind. So ultimately, yeah, this has the potential to enable quicker play, but depending on a whole host of circumstances, it can also do exactly the opposite. The second consideration, and also what I think was a main reason for doing it, was allowed creatures to be more immediately impactful. One of the biggest criticisms from 2014 era monsters was that they would often end up dying before they even had the opportunity to do their cool thing, especially if they lost initiative. And then even if they did get the chance to try and do something, players would often save against the effect anyway, and then the challenge level of the fight could feel trivialized since the monster isn't really accomplishing anything. This then inevitably leads to that ever-present perception that monsters are nothing more than just bags of hit points with nothing interesting to do. Well, it was very clear that the team wanted to avoid that on some creatures now, particularly ones that they wanted to feel a bit more threatening. They wanted these monsters to have immediate impact. One thing that is worth noting at this stage is that the idea that there are an overabundance of on-hit no-save effects is just not accurate. I've read through every block a couple of times, and while I didn't keep stats on this specifically, I'd say it's likely somewhere around the 10 to 20% of monsters at most, which is still certainly a lot, and won't make it feel any better if you're fighting one of them, but that context is important. In any case, if the goal here was to have creatures be felt, they've accomplished that goal. Being hit by a Mind Flayer, taking damage, and being both grappled and stunned will evoke a pretty visceral reaction from a player. It helps make monsters feel terrifying and threatening. I don't know that it's possible to argue against that, but it can also result in a feeling of disengagement from players as well, and this brings us to consideration number 3, undermining player defenses and saving throws. Now we're moving more into the downsides of opting for this design, and I want to be clear that undermining defenses and saving throws shouldn't be overlooked or disregarded. This is a big deal. Players become invested in their characters and want to see them prevail over the dangers that they encounter, and defensive options play into that heavily. Investing in improved or magical armor, choosing spells to increase armor class or other bonuses, improving ability scores to increase saving throw bonuses. Hell, the monk gains access to a class feature that gives them proficiency in all saving throws. Some players will even multi-class strictly for the purposes of providing their characters with more defensive options. But the problem now is that if monsters just have the ability to impart status conditions or other effects without any sort of intervention, well, it can kind of make a lot of things feel totally meaningless. Players not only invest on these types of abilities, but oftentimes they might even pick certain classes or subclasses because of those kinds of abilities. Being a paladin with access to aura of protection and giving your party a bonus on all of their saving throws doesn't feel nearly as powerful or relevant if the monster just gets to say no and applies the condition anyway. And yeah, there is something to be said for powerful creatures being able to bypass even the magic that players possess, but that definitely gets a bit muddied when you're talking about CR 1/4 wolves. And I know that someone's just gonna say, well, it's just that the wolf is so exceptionally good at dragging people down, it's not about the player. And sure, I can sort of see it, but also let's not pretend that that doesn't make our ability scores feel at least somewhat worthless some of the time. Another interesting way to tackle this issue would have been to introduce a mechanic similar to what Draw Steel refers to as potency. We're not going to get too into the weeds on this, but essentially that same bite attack could have indicated that it automatically knocks a creature prone if they have a strength of 14 or lower. Otherwise, nothing happens. This actually accomplishes 3 goals simultaneously. Firstly, it can still speed up play by eliminating the need for unnecessary saving throws. If the creature's strong enough, they're fine. If they're too weak, then it drops. Secondly, it still lets players feel the value of their decisions. If they invested in strength because it was their primary ability or because it was something that made sense for their character, they'll still get to feel the impact of that. And finally, it actually incentivizes a slightly different way to consider character creation. It makes dump stats probably become less of a thing and can encourage players to spread out their abilities more rather than focusing heavily on one or two. This could be a good or bad thing depending on how the game's overall design adapted to accommodate for it, but that's an entirely different discussion. An interesting facet of this is that it actually wouldn't even have been an entirely new mechanic, despite what I just said. There were some spells actually in 2014 D&D, like Detect Thoughts, which would automatically fail if a creature had an intelligence score of 3 or lower. Now, the complicated part here would be figuring out when to make an effect a static number like a potency, or to make it a DC, but again, that's for an entirely different video and an entirely different discussion. Let's now move on from that, but we're not quite done with Undermining Defenses. Beyond just the investment piece, there is another additional impact. Firstly, these types of effects punish lower armor classes even more and in a way that is typically unexpected. A player would reasonably expect that with a lower AC, they will be hit with a weapon more frequently. What they might not expect is that with their lower AC, they will become instantly poisoned or paralyzed or incapacitated. The result of this is to disproportionately weight armor class and heavily incentivize, even more than already, the use of spells like shield or feats like defensive duelists, which can bump armor class, even if they're only temporary since all you need to do is avoid the hit to just dodge everything. Moving on, the fourth major design consideration to make here is that changing over to a model like this where conditions are automatically applied on a hit will likely disproportionately affect martial melee characters more than others, as they will tend to be in the immediate range of the attacks that are imposing these conditions. This feels a bit unfortunate given that these are also the same groups of characters that have so consistently been given the short end of the stick for years and years now, and just when it looks like things are on the up for them, they get knocked right back down. This is a challenging one since to some degree, it's part of the natural give and take of being a melee character. You get up close and personal with your quarry, which was obviously inherently risky, but the upside is that hopefully you get to deliver some devastating blows of your own. Now though, the issue is that that same vulnerability that you were risking, just getting hit, not only deals damage, but can automatically put you into a crippling position that you may have no way to escape from, and it can end up leaving you in a position of wondering why you even bothered taking the risk when the downside is just so steep. This then ultimately leads us into the fifth design consideration, that being the impact on encounter variety, and specifically how these types of monsters have the potential to encourage defensive play and discourage creativity. A core part of encounter design in Dungeons & Dragons is variety, presenting players with different kinds of challenges that tests multiple aspects of their characters and forces them to adapt. The thing is though, that when on-hit no-save rider effects become too common, they can reduce the diversity of combat encounters. When multiple monsters start applying effects automatically on a hit, combats can start to feel a little bit predictable and repetitive rather than dynamic and engaging. Instead of a variety of different tactical challenges, encounters then start to follow a formula. The monster hits, the condition is applied, the player shut down. If this then happens in multiple fights over many sessions, it can make combat start to feel a little bit samey, since the strategy to overcome these enemies is often just about avoiding being hit rather than making any sort of interesting decision. And at first, the fights might seem tense and dangerous, but over time, they start blending together because they all end up playing out the same way. Like I said, the player gets hit, they suffer a condition, and then they lose their turn or their effectiveness in some way. When every difficult monster is just another variation of it hits and stuns you, it removes the other more engaging ways of making fights interesting. Here's the thing though, with all of that being said, I understand why they ended up with the designs where they are. Players have incredible power and the ability to shrug off a lot of conditions in a relatively easy manner, depending on the group and what spells or feats and whatever else has been taken. It's also clear that they weren't really looking to fundamentally redesign core mechanics for the game in the 2024 rules update, which is why something like the potency mechanic we mentioned earlier was just never going to happen. I think it's important for monsters, especially iconic and big threats, to feel impactful and momentous. I'm not confident though that on-hit no-save effects were the best way to accomplish this, but it's also entirely possible that it may have been the best way to go about it, given the design limitations that they've given themselves. So if I had to come down on this one way or the other, I would say that on balance, I think the move toward more on-hit no-save effects was a good one. The single biggest reason I feel that way is because of something I mentioned earlier. Monsters often never got the chance to just do their cool thing, and I truly believe that it can be more fun for everyone if they got to do that more often. I think this is especially true in high-level play. I've spent a lot of time with players in tiers 3 and 4, and it can be genuinely difficult to effectively challenge them in any meaningful capacity. Most things are just either too weak and fall flat, or you homebrew the living crap out of something until it's a death sentence. That's partially facetious. It's an interesting paradox though, in that at high levels, when players might expect to be immune to most things, that's when I think these types of effects are actually at their best, because they can allow for combats to feel consistently challenging throughout a campaign, and even well into the later levels. And if you really want to go down the whole realism route in a make-believe game with magic and dragons, you would also expect world-ending threats to just be able to do an epic thing without any form of intervention, so it can even make sense that way. Like I said, there's pros and cons, but I think I largely fall on the I'm here for it side of things. Anyway, that's all I got. I am incredibly curious to hear what you all think about this one, so let me know in the comments. I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion to have. So please go check out my merch store and some of my other D&D videos, but otherwise, take care.